I'm not gay, but if I was, I'd go for Douglas.
You bragging all about the things you can do every time you make a pitch. If you're so smart, how come you ain't rich? You claim to have picked every horse that won, 'cause you know just which is which.
Okay. Now, not sure where this is going to lead. We've got a bit of a running sheet, but it could go anywhere.
Improvisation is fine for me.
Yeah, good.
I don't mind a bit of jazz.
Well, as you're saying, this is like, how long has it been? About 3 weeks since the gym doors closed?
It'll be coming up on 4, I think.
4 weeks?
I think by Saturday. So Saturday was the last day of training. So on Saturday it'll be 4 weeks since the last session.
So that's 4 weeks since hearing those familiar echoes of incessant chatter flowing through the sweat-filled air. So, welcome, Tyson Tagarela Read.
Oh, I haven't heard this one before. What's that mean? What's that in Portuguese?
Chatterbox.
Ha! Well picked.
Yes.
Appropriate
Chatterbox,
name.
Loudmouth windbag. Now, I don't know if everyone knows this story, but I've just got to tell.
Which one's this?
Well, you know, one of the most fundamental and obvious rules about nicknames is you don't give yourself a nickname. And I remember a young budding wrestler coming to training one night and announcing to the class he'd like to be known as Lombriga.
I made a mistake with that one.
Yeah, and you even sort of directly told Minnow about this too, and Minnow kept a straight face, which was kind of...
There's another side to this story.
Okay, let me finish my understanding.
You finish yours first.
Well, so yeah, Lombriga, and I guess you thought that Google Translate was kind of accurate, and you thought it meant worm. And, you know, it's kind of cool, you know, worm card, slippery like a worm. You know, it's like a hydra. You cut it in half, it turns into 2 worms. But I think a short time later, after the joke had sort of run its course, you probably looked a bit closer at Google Translate, and there's a few details you missed about what sort of worm it was.
Yeah,
was it like
couple.
An intestinal worm?
Yeah, so okay, so my story from the beginning, Minnow used to call me Worm because I was a wriggly, skinny, not particularly strong teenager. And so, you know, something like Snake wouldn't have worked because snakes are actually pretty muscular and tough. So Worm seemed more applicable, I gather. I'm guessing about the snake thing, but Worm was my nickname, and he referred to me by Worm a few times, like Facebook posts and that sort of thing, when there was a competition. And what happened was I went to Google Translate with my limited knowledge, and I looked up worm, translated it into Portuguese, and there were a bunch of them, and I kind of just picked the one that sounded the best to me. So an earthworm would be something different, I think, minhoca. And just the general word for worm, which also means earthworm, is verme. And that's kind of sounds pretty similar. So I kind of didn't want those ones. And I saw Lombriga. I was like, oh, Lombriga, that sounds cool. And I was like, hey, Minnow, doesn't Lombriga mean... I messaged him on Facebook. I'm like, hey, Minnow, wouldn't you, if you were saying worm in Portuguese, wouldn't you say Lombriga? And I should have guessed because he replied, ha 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 ha, yes. And I should have guessed from that laugh, that text laugh, that I just made a terrible error. And I don't actually remember coming to class and saying I want to be known as, but I feel like Minnow may have started referring to me as that in class.
All right.
But
well,
I'll never do that sort of thing again.
Hilariously quite fitting Lombriga had a guard puller, butt scooter.
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether this was like an April Fool's joke or something, but I saw years ago something about guard pullers, like butt scooters, do actually have a higher rate of intestinal worms. So, who knows, maybe.
Yeah,
But I can do
think you learnt your
takedowns as
lesson.
well.
You got to wait
Yeah.
until you've earned the nickname. So I think you've earned Tagarela. Tagarela.
Tagarela.
Yeah.
You have to sound like you're kind of sad, I feel. That's whenever you're doing a Portuguese accent. Tagarela. It's like you're weeping.
All right. So let's turn our attention to this COVID crisis we're all facing.
Yes.
How are you feeling about this sort of strange socialist experiment that we've been plunged into?
When they announced in Tasmania the 6-month, well, they said, gyms and everything are shut down. Expect it to be for 6 months. I thought, oh, that's going to kill me. Like 6 months of no training. I'm going to get fat, and I'm going to get like sluggish and morose. But it hasn't happened yet. I've gotten a little bit more morose, but I'm still in the same sort of shape that I was. Small mercies. So I don't know. We'll see. I think it depends primarily on how much of an effect the social distancing measures have. So if it really flattens the curve, which apparently it has, maybe they'll start letting people go back to something resembling normal life soon. I think it's international travel. It's the biggest issue in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I think Tasmania's lucky because we can cut ourselves off even from the rest of Australia. We can just say, look, no flights come in, no ships come into Tasmania, whether they're from the mainland or from overseas, just nothing. So we have a bit more freedom in that sense compared to the rest of the country. So who knows? Maybe Tasmania will go back to normal earlier than everyone else, and we'll just sort of keep ourselves cut off from the rest of the country. So
yeah. Well, it'll be interesting in the next few months to see what happens with this. Jiu-jitsu is a big part of your life. You're pretty much at every available class. So that's a lot of time, a lot of spare time. So you've been reading,
probably
music, watching videos.
12 hours a week that I've suddenly found extra.
Yeah. What are you doing with it to sort of sharpen yourself?
Jiu-jitsu wise or just in general?
Any-wise, yeah.
Any-wise? Well, I'm finishing off a book slowly that I was given for my birthday last year. Good old Thomas Sowell.
What the welfare system and other kinds of governmental programs are doing is paying people to fail. Insofar as they fail, they receive the money. Insofar as they succeed, even to a moderate extent, the money is taken away. This is even extended into the school systems, where they will give money to schools with low scores. Insofar as the school improves its education, the money is taken away, so that you are subsidizing people to fail in their own private lives and become more dependent upon the handouts.
Economic facts and fallacies. I'm not an economist, nor do I have a particular interest in it, but it's a very interesting book, very accessible. I've got a few others up there. I've got Guns, Germs and Steel by Jared Diamond. I've got the William James masterpiece, not that I've read it yet, but that's what it is renowned as, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And then been listening to a lot of stuff like Eric Weinstein's podcast, The Portal, and a few others.
You like him better than his brother, yeah?
I like Eric more than Brett. I think Brett's wife is more interesting than Brett, and I think Eric is more interesting than both of them. So
I think Eric, I don't know, a bit annoying.
He can be,
just his character.
But I think his insights are far more not valuable perhaps, but far more interesting than Brett's.
Yeah, bit broader knowledge base, probably.
Yeah, he's got sort of that kind of physicsy background, and as well as the economics and maths. So Brett's like evolutionary biology's kind of fun, but it's also kind of boring a lot of the time, and some of it's just common sense.
Yeah.
Although, Douglas Murray might have something to say about how uncommon that is nowadays.
Douglas Murray.
I'm not gay, but if I was, I'd go for Douglas.
If it is more comfortable to be wrong than to be right, then an awful lot of people will choose to be wrong.
I love listening to him. He's just so on point.
So articulate as well.
Yeah.
He's the sort of guy you can just listen to for hours.
If you've heard the previous episodes, start with a 10-question rapid response segment. So I ask you 10 questions. I'll give you 3 options, and you've got to choose your preference, pretty much. Fairly easy.
Yep.
I probably need a name for this segment, so I don't have to explain it every time. But maybe that's for people listening out there. Come up with a name. We'll stick it in here. Question 1. If you were selected to take part in a scientific study trial of the following psychedelics, which would you choose? Psilocybin, lysergic acid diethylamide, or dimethyltryptamine?
Right. I would rule out LSD. Primarily, it just takes too long. It's a much, much longer one than the other two. Also, it's far less analogous pharmacologically to the endogenous compounds in the brain, endogenous like neurotransmitters. So I would go with DMT probably, but depending on what the study was for, I might choose psilocybin instead. Probably DMT. I'd start with DMT and then go for the next study.
You've thought quite a lot about this, haven't you? All right, question 2.
Yeah.
What would you say is your leaning? White, black, or royal blue?
Oh, for geese, definitely black.
Question 3. Of the following trilogies, which is your preference? Star Wars, Back to the Future, or Indiana Jones?
Which of the Star Wars trilogies?
The first, the originals.
The original trilogy?
Yes.
I'd have to go with so episodes 4, 5, 6.
Yes.
Of Star Wars. Yeah, I'd go with Star Wars. Indiana Jones is close behind. I do really, really like Indiana Jones. And I hate to say this, I have the Back to the Future trilogy. I've only seen the first one.
What?
I know I know it's a travesty. It's on my little DVD shelf over there in the corner. I have it and I haven't watched it. I'll try to watch it over this quarantine period because I'm trying to get through all the movies that I have that I've not finished. Or I haven't seen. I just watched Shawshank Redemption the other day, and a few days before that I watched something else. I can't even remember what it was now, but I will watch Back to the Future because you just asked me about it.
Okay,
and then
good.
I'll be able to give you a more solid answer. But I feel like Star Wars, the original trilogy, would still be my answer.
Mm. Of the three of those, which would you...
Of Star Wars?
Of Star Wars, yeah.
Empire Strikes Back. I think as I've gotten older, I've realized more and more why it's considered the classic of the series. Not just a classic, but the classic. Even though the fourth movie, or episode 4, started it all, got the ball rolling, episode 5 was where they really raised the bar and said, this is a great film.
Yeah.
So episode 5.
I concur. Empire Strikes Back, definitely by far the best. Return of the Jedi was close behind, but if it wasn't for the Ewoks...
See, that's probably why I liked it when I was younger. I was like, look, they're like teddy bears.
Question 4.
Yeah.
Jean Piaget, Viktor Frankl, or Carl Jung?
As much as I love all three of them, I'm going to have to go with Frankl because I think his work is more sort of immediately applicable for people. First of all, he was, Piaget was not a psychotherapist, whereas Jung and Frankl were. But of the two styles of psychotherapy, I would go with Frankl's because I think it's more applicable to a wider demographic immediately. Jung's is excellent for people that need Jungian therapy, which is often more creative people. So, for instance, Jackson Pollock was depressed for a very long time, and I think he used a Jungian psychotherapist. And apparently, I don't like his paintings, but apparently there are archetypal and Jungian themes within his paintings.
Question 5. Hateful Eight, Kill Bill, or Pulp Fiction?
Okay, so funnily enough, you've named the 3 Tarantino movies that when I first saw them, I gave them a 10 out of 10. I'd rule out the
nowhere
Hateful
to go
Eight.
from 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I know, but I know that you have a particular view on giving movies a 10 out of 10 rating. Like even your favourite movie is like an 8.5 or something.
Yeah.
I'd rule out the Hateful Eight, Kill Bill or Pulp Fiction. I'm going to have to go with Pulp Fiction.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration?
Question 6. Tim Brooke Taylor, Graham Garden, or Bill Oddie?
Look, I was always a bit more of a fan of Bill because he was the short one, and I was always really short growing up. Plus, he had a full beard, whereas Graham just had the sideburns.
Yeah.
But all 3 of them are hilarious.
Goodies, goody, goody, yum, yum.
Question 7. Run the Pipe, Uchimata, or Imanari Roll?
Run the Pipe.
Yeah.
I don't mind a good heel hook, but look, I got to go with what works for me the best, and I'm not as good at judo as I am at wrestling, so I've got to go with the single leg, run the pipe.
Question 9. Jon Snow, Tyrion Lannister, or Sandor Clegane?
Oh, now that is a tricky one. I'm going to rule out Jon Snow just because that's
obvious.
He's kind of he's a bit too. I don't want to say normal, but he's too kind of like straightforwards. I like Tyrion and Sandor a bit more because they're a bit more complex. Sandor especially, he's a particularly nasty guy, especially at the beginning of the series, and he changes across the seasons to become, one of the heroes of the story. And I really do like how both Tyrion and Sandor's arcs end up. Spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it. So Sandor ends up killing his brother, which was his ultimate goal, but he does it by throwing, spear tackling both of them into a fire that neither of them can get out of. And he's always hated fire. The whole series he hates fire, and then he spear tackles his brother into fire. I really like that arc. Sort of just seems like fulfilling, if that's the right word.
Yeah.
Tyrion, again, he's the short guy, so I kind of have a bit of an affinity for him. And the funny thing is that, his dad's always banging on about the survival of the family, and then Tyrion's the last one that ends up living. So, I don't know, I'd probably go with Tyrion.
Let me give you some advice, bastard. Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you.
Last question. Rationalism, empiricism, or pragmatism?
Pragmatism, easy.
I've asked the preceding guests on this little podcast a bit about their upbringing, what they were like as kids. But you started training when you were pretty much a kid, so we all know what you're like.
Yeah.
You were
a
like
few months shy of 14.
Yeah. So you were a know-it-all back then, and you're still a know-it-all, but you know a lot more.
Yeah, I actually know stuff now. I think somewhat surprisingly, I have been referred to in the last couple of years by several people as wise, which has always surprised me.
Yeah, well, didn't McGilchrist say something about the person who proposes that?
Well,
they are
here's
wise?
the thing: is
I think the difficulty with wisdom is that no wise person will tell you what it is or how to achieve it. It's a kind of approach to the world that can only come with experience, probably only comes with a certain amount of suffering, and comes from a lot of self-examination. And anybody who claims it hasn't got it.
I don't refer to myself as wise. I let other people do that.
And then just tell people that.
Look, I mean, it's not blowing
Tyson.
my own trumpet, it's blowing their trumpet, it's just playing my tune.
You started jiu-jitsu when you're in grade 8?
Yep.
Roughly, yep. Did you know anything about jiu-jitsu before you started?
Kind of. So I got into it via Sherlock Holmes. So I think it was the summer holidays between 7 and 8 that I saw the movie Sherlock Holmes, and immediately I got interested in it. I read the whole, like the collected works of Sherlock Holmes in a couple of months, which is, several hundreds of pages of relatively difficult for a grade 7 or 8, I'd say at least, English. Like, it's old language. It's not the sort of thing that you read every day. And anyway, he dies obviously in one story, as most people know, but then back in the early 20th century, Arthur Conan Doyle, or late 19th, I forget when exactly it was, but Arthur Conan Doyle killed him off. He wanted to retire the character. And then everyone was like, no, we love Sherlock, bring him back. So he brought him back, and he had to come up with a way that he hadn't died and that he'd faked his death. And in the way that he dies, he gets into a fight with this guy called Moriarty, and they fall off a waterfall in Switzerland. You'd probably die from that. I don't know. But anyway, in the first sort of reboot story, or the first story back, he sort of comes into Watson's house in the middle of the night and explains to him what's happened. And he says, I beat Moriarty through my knowledge of Japanese wrestling, or as it's called in the book, Baritsu, which was kind of a late 19th century, basically MMA. A guy in England was an engineer, went over to Japan, learnt from Jigoro Kano and a few other jiu-jitsu people over there, brought a couple of black belts back to England to start basically an MMA club. So there were boxers, there were French kickboxers, there were European wrestlers, and there were these Japanese guys teaching submission, like jiu-jitsu, and stick fighters as well, because people would actually have sticks back in the day, even if they didn't have a limp. So it was basically a self-defense thing. And anyway, I got really into that, and I bought a couple of the books, and they had these sort of technical sections where they had like old jiu-jitsu techniques that were literally printed in 1900. And so I'd done, I'd seen an armbar from guard. I didn't know how to do it very well because I didn't have anyone to practice with. But I did actually know a couple of things. I just didn't know how to do them properly. And that's basically all I knew about jiu-jitsu was from a book of techniques that were over 100 years old, which goes to show how, you know, they still work. They did work back then, and they still work now. Doesn't really change much. I mean, we've still got elbows, we've still got necks. You can still choke people, you can still break them.
Yeah, most things about jiu-jitsu, it's always just a revolution, and it evolves a little bit with that revolution. All right, so yeah, your first class of jiu-jitsu, you rock up to Minol's club. There's some big, brutish-looking guys there.
I remember those days well.
Are you thinking, oh, I should have rethought this, or did you enjoy that class?
Look, I've got a bit of a competitive nature, and especially when people say, if it's something that I want to do, and if people say, you're never going to get good at that, but it's something that I really want to do, that just kind of makes me angry a little bit and makes me try even harder and stick with it, just to kind of, you know, flipping the bird, so to speak, it's, you know, it's the ultimate, like, eat your words kind of thing. So I don't think anyone expected me to keep going.
Me included.
And it almost felt like people were trying to make me quit. I didn't realize till, you know, a couple of months in that was just everyone just trained to, you know, kill each other every single roll back then. But I think that was kind of a good way for me to get into it, actually. I don't think if people had been, if they'd sort of been nicer to me, I think they would have actually not been as good. I'm kind of glad that they, you know, beat the daylights out of me every single session, despite the fact that, you know, they had 20 plus kilos on me, and they were all, you know, these jacked Greek statues walking around, and I was, you know, less than 60 kilos, 14 years old, was like nearly could bench press my body weight. I was pretty happy about that when the day that happened. I was like, oof, I'm a strong man. So I'm kind of glad that no one took it easy on me, actually. I don't think I would have gotten as good as quickly if people had been nice.
It's a very fine line when someone new comes along. You're not sure whether you're going too hard or too soft, because some people, they see that softness and think, oh, these guys aren't tough, so I won't come back.
Yeah.
And you go too hard, and they think, oh, geez, the guy's too hard.
Yeah.
So
it's
always...
you kind of have to judge character a bit.
Yes.
Some people want to prove, or I guess be proven, how tough they aren't. You know, and if you don't prove to them how much better than them you are, they'll be like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I don't have to train with these guys because I can already beat them up.
Yeah.
Even though that's us being nice to them. And if you get someone who's kind of a bit more timid, they might not want to go straight into the deep end. You got to start them out with the old pool noodle or a paddle board or something, and not just like throw them off the deepest diving board in the whole swimming pool.
Oh, oh, oh my God. Oh, dude, you all right? No.
Oh my God.
There's such a broad range of personality types in any one class, and not just our class. I mean, across the whole community of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes, well, there's a lot of potential for clashes to happen. Do you remember any of those clashes, and how did you deal with that, if so?
Look, there's one incident that happened about 6 months in where so the first night that I trained, and for the first 2.5 years, I only ever trained on Thursdays. I did like 2 Saturday sessions in 2.5 years. I didn't really do any. And anyway, on the first night that I started, there were these 2 brothers, and one of them was my age and the other one was a bit younger. And the younger one was actually a lot better than the elder one. So the younger one, who was a lot smaller than both of us, was actually submitting me all the time. And the other guy, actually, I think when I first started, both of them were submitting me all the time because they knew a bit and I knew basically nothing. And so, you know, they'd be getting on my back or whatever and choking me out. And anyway, I came along for every week, every Thursday for 6 months. But after about maybe a month, they kind of stopped coming on Thursdays. I think they might have just fallen off the map, or I don't know whether, I don't even remember their names. I think one of them was called Bo, but I forget exactly. Yeah. I don't remember which one that was either, if it was the older or the younger one. And anyway, the 6 months later they come back, and I've had 6 months of training, so I'm starting to get the hang of a few things, like knowing not to just turn around and let someone jump on my back and choke me. Fairly straightforward kind of thing to learn, I guess. And I wrestle with the younger brother, and he still submits me a couple of times just because he's like a bit of a weirdo, and he's, you know, he can do all sorts of things because he's way smaller than me. It's actually hard, I think, to fight someone much smaller than you, especially when you don't have a lot of weight or strength or anything to crush them with. There's a certain point of diminishing returns, but when you're both sort of roughly the same size, but one of them's a bit smaller, a bit faster, I think it's actually easier to fight someone bigger than you. But then the brother that was my size, my age, he couldn't submit me at all. I don't know whether I submitted him. I don't think I did. But neither of us submitted each other. And at the end of class, I'm stretching. I'm just like doing a hamstring stretch. Or maybe, I can't remember what it was. I think it was a hamstring stretch. Just, you know, sitting on the ground, leaning forwards. And this guy comes up behind me, the older brother, comes up behind me and just slaps on a rear naked choke. And I'm like, what is happening here? And I tap, and he lets me go. And I was thinking, like, you know, what a douchebag. And he said, I didn't even ask, why'd you do that? He just straight away said, oh, my brother told me that I couldn't submit you, or something like that. And I thought, so you come up behind me, and, well, I mean, it's just one of those weird things, but it's always stuck with me because I thought, what does it mean? It means less than nothing if you can, like, take someone by surprise, jump on their back when they don't even know you're behind them, and choke them like that. It's one thing to choke someone in an actual roll when you're both trying to beat the other person, but it's like, it doesn't mean, it means something but nothing technical if you come up behind them and choke them. Like, if you come up behind them and choke them and they don't know it, all that means is that you're a scumbag. It doesn't mean that you're better at jiu-jitsu or that.
All throughout your 10 years of training, you've been a pretty regular competitor.
Mm.
What do you think the value is in competition?
Whether or not you lose or win, it's like having 10 lessons every match. So my favorite thing personally about competition is that I don't know what they're going to do. Maybe I do. I might have seen them before. I might have rolled with them before. But especially on mainland competitions, I don't know what the person's going to do. I don't know what they're good at. They might be really good on top. They might be really good on bottom. They might be well-rounded at both. Who knows? They might be someone who doesn't really do a lot of positional stuff, but they've got really good submissions. I have no idea what they're good at. I have to focus on what I'm good at. And if what I do is good enough and I am able to impose my game on them, I'll win. And if the opposite's true, then obviously they win. But that's the thing that I like about it the most. It's proof of how well the things that you're doing at training have paid off. So if, and I think that's also a reflection of how you train in jiu-jitsu anyway. Like if you train easy, it's hard to win. If you train hard, it's easy to win. So, or easier, I should say. It's never really easy. But you know, if I go to training and I just beat all the white belts, I beat the blue belts, it's not that I'm not going to probably get a lot out of it. If I'm rolling with purple and other brown belts or black belts that are much more likely to beat me, I've always thought, you know, sort of 20 kilos is worth a belt, basically. So if I'm rolling with a purple belt who's 20 kilos heavier than me, I consider that a pretty even match. Because, you know, that edge in technique, whatever it might be, I kind of need that to make up for the 20 kilos of strength that I'm lacking, basically. It's a rough estimate. It's not an exact science. So if I'm rolling with purple belts, I'm rolling with other brown belts, I'm rolling with black belts that are more likely to submit me, I'm training harder. I have to be more focused. I have to be on edge. Well, not on edge, but I have to be like on point. I don't want to be on edge like you know, cocaine addict who's getting paranoid kind of thing. But yeah, on point. So I have to be sharp. Whereas I can be lazy with white belts and to a degree blue belts. Blue belts, because they know enough about how to submit you if you do the wrong thing, you can't be completely lax with them. But most often white belts, you can just kind of lie around.
Yeah, now there's probably two schools of thought that I've heard recently about development in jiu-jitsu with who you fight, who you wrestle with. Like the one is you always need to fight guys that are at a higher level than you, and the other one is you got to wrestle guys at a lower level than you.
Yeah, I think Joe Rogan and Danaher,
yeah,
Danaher and Joe Rogan, I think both have said smash blue belts. And there's truth to both. And the reason I say that is that I like if I test out a new technique that I'm not very good at against a purple, brown, or a black belt, I'm going to I guarantee it's not going to work because I'm just not proficient. I'm just not proficient enough at it, and they're going to beat me. They're going to find a hole, and then, you know, like if I try and berimbolo someone who, yeah, I'm not very good at the berimbolo. I'll freely admit that. I would like to get better. I was trying to get better, and then, you know, coronavirus happened. I'm not going to try that on a black belt. I'm going to try my already well-developed techniques on black belts and brown belts and purple belts. The ones that I'm going to use against blue belts are more often, or white belts are the ones that they're completely new to me. And this is me personally. I'm a technique collector. I love trying lots and lots of different things and kind of cherry picking bits and sort of fitting them into my game where I see fit. But that's when I wrestle with white and blue belts. I'm usually trying more to test out things that I'm not good at. And when I'm wrestling against, you know, purple and up, it's more often the case that I am, first of all, physically training more. So I'm trying to push the pace, or I'm trying to be more explosive, whatever the case is. Trying to train my energy systems and cardiovascular and muscular systems. And then if I'm rolling with white and blues, it's more techniques that I don't know. And also with, you know, upper belts, it's more trying to sharpen and put together probably the meta game. Like, I have a general idea in my head of what I want to do, whether it's I want to pull guard and sweep or get to the back and then submit or something, or whether I want to take down, stay on top, pass, mount, back take, whatever, and then submit. I'm trying to sort of test the meta game more on the upper belts, and I'm trying to test the specifics of things that I don't know well on lower belts. So I would say do both. Don't just smash blue belts, because you're going to stay kind of, well, it depends. If you're smashing them with things that you know how to do well, you're definitely not going to improve. If you're smashing them with things that you're testing out, that's good, because at least you're adding more stuff to your arsenal. And look, if you can smash black belts, that's if you're one of the Mendes brothers, or if you're Andre Galvao and you just run wreck shop against everyday black belts, you might call them, even though they'll kill any man, woman, and child on the street that crosses them. Not that you'd be killing children, but you can have the capability to. Andre Galvao's going to treat you like a child, because that's his 9 to 5. Every day he's just doing nothing but trying to get better at jiu-jitsu and trying to make other people better at it. Whereas it's like, people like you have a 9 to 5. There's only so much time you can devote to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So there's levels, I guess.
Yes. And with everything, it's a combined approach to learning to get a bit of a broader appreciation of the skills you're developing and need to develop. We'll probably extend that conversation out a bit further later on.
Just one brief note is also, I'm not generally going to be rolling with with like purple, brown, or black belts to try and help them get better, but I will roll with white belts and blue belts specifically to try and help them train rather than train for myself.
Yes.
And that's another issue that you find with, smash blue belts to get better. It's like, well, I also kind of want them to get better at jiu-jitsu. And if you just demolish people all the time, that's good for teaching them defense, proper defense, but I also want to see them get better attacks. So yeah, it's in some ways it's more beneficial sometimes to roll and let them be the ones that are sort of controlling the pace and everything, not me.
Yeah.
So that's another little tidbit to throw in. I should have mentioned that before. But
no, that's right. And I guess for me, I've got a bit of a different role at the club. So I'm trying to bring people up to a certain level. So it's training's not really for me anymore. It's for other people. So my focus is on
retired from competition for about 6 years now, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I've entered a different stage of life.
You've entered the grandfather stage.
Yes.
As they call it.
We shall move on to the main body of the conversation today. And we're going to take a bit of a deviation from the 2 previous episodes, which sort of focused a bit more on physicality and sort of the physical aspects of different types of jiu-jitsu. So focus a bit more on the psychological, philosophical viewpoint.
Psychology is my area of study, so
yes,
hopefully this
so that's
is
why
the right conversation.
Going to go down this avenue. First of all, I'd like to introduce the name of the club first and give everyone a bit of a rundown of why I chose the name and the logo. Now, it's not Saber as in the blade saber or saber tooth
saber rattling.
So I know you don't spell saber that way. It's actually
We're not
Portuguese.
Americans.
It's actually Portuguese. Saber means to know. That word know, knowledge, drove the idea behind the club name. I've got here the first post about the name 5 or 6 years ago now on the club Facebook page. I said, Saber means to know, knowledge. Whilst there is definitely a portion of explicit type knowledge that informs the development of a skill, the vast majority, I feel, of understanding in jiu-jitsu is more fully activated via a tacit or implicit meaning. It is a silent knowledge that can't be explained with words or mathematical equations. Yeah, so I think we'll stretch that out a bit more with your interest and knowledge on certain aspects. But
Definitely
also
have a few things to say about that.
Yeah. Also, the logo is an interesting one. It's very unusual. It's not the typical.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It's a fractal, isn't it?
It's a fractal. I mean, if you look at a sunflower.
Yeah.
I'll get out of the way here. It's that same fractal pattern. Within the apparent chaos of nature, there's actually a pattern that's hidden, or sometimes not so hidden, in that chaos.
And the relationship between the golden angle, the golden ratio, and the Fibonacci sequence is what causes the sunflower spirals to appear in numbers straight out of Fibonacci.
Jiu-jitsu is about trying to activate that part of you which understands things as a broad whole thing. So I'm seeing the flower, not the little sections there. But sometimes we need to see those little sections, how they relate to the whole.
Sometimes. That's the key. That's the key.
So it was all a bit, all a bit artistic and creative, and a bit too much salt and pepper on something. But
salt and pepper, as in don't go chasing waterfalls. No, that was TLC. Sorry, no. Salt and pepper was the
push it.
Yep.
Yeah. So how should we proceed from here? Have you got any initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, the name itself, to know, and this is, I guess, now is probably as good a time as any. The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World by Ian McGilchrist. Yeah, great minds think alike, we'll say. Best $30 you'll ever spend. I must like it a lot, which is why I've got a little bit to say about all of this. It's one of the most profound books I've read, possibly the most.
Yeah.
Certainly of scientific books. I would say that.
So basically, he speculates it because there's no actual proof. Yeah. But he describes
not entirely.
He describes the two very distinct processes of the two different hemispheres, the left and the right, and how
the worlds of the hemispheres.
Yes. And how sometimes they don't speak too well to each other. Or one thinks it's the master and the other doesn't really care if it is the master or not. And that sort of leads us sometimes into places that aren't beneficial for our learning.
The title came from a Nietzschean allegory where there's a master of a land, a place. I don't know, can't remember whether it's a city or a country or whatever. Anyway, there's a master, and he realizes that there's too much going on for him to personally get involved with things, and that in fact he should not get involved with things because it would force him to get too close to things, and he needs what McGilchrist would call a necessary distance. So he needs to maintain a sort of necessary distance. So what he does is he gets his brightest and best servant, the emissary, to get involved on a sort of very fine detail level with all of the day-to-day things. And eventually the emissary starts thinking, this master of mine is just kind of not doing anything, not doing the real work. I'm here, I know all of the stuff that actually needs knowing. And so he basically supplants the master, takes over control of this land, and everything falls into chaos because he doesn't know what he doesn't know. Or he has no idea what it is that he doesn't know. So he's ignorant of his ignorance, which is an important idea. And because of that ignorance, the land turns to chaos and nothing useful happens. And that's the origin of the title. And most people think of the left hemisphere as the dominant hemisphere, partly because it has speech, or it has not speech necessarily, but it has the motor control of speech. So if you have a stroke in like Broca's area or whatever, I think it's Broca's area, on the left side of your brain, you cannot speak. you can understand speech, or you might be able to understand speech, depends on how extensive the damage is, but you cannot create sounds and formulate words with your body. And so that's one of the, and it's also the one that controls the right side of the body. So it's the right hand, which for most people is the dominant hand. And that's basically why it's seen as the dominant hemisphere. And McGilchrist inverts that and says, well, it's in fact the left hemisphere is the emissary, the right hemisphere is the master. And the reason for that is that the master, although not necessarily as involved, is the thing that understands. So the quick and dirty, which he doesn't particularly like doing, he prefers nuance, but the quick and dirty of it is that the right hemisphere understands the world and the left hemisphere manipulates it, whether through action with your hands or through speech. That's the quick and dirty sort of hemispheric breakdown.
Maybe also the right hemisphere sees the big picture.
Yes.
The left hemisphere sees all the little minute details. Doesn't know how they sort of go together, but he sees all the details.
Yes. So it's like, if you think of it in a military sense, the left hemisphere is like a sniper. It's very, very accurate. It does what the sniper does his job very, very well. He's very precise.
Yeah.
And he's very, very focused and is very much focused on details as well. He doesn't care if there's a tank over there. He doesn't care if there's, a bunch of infantry over here. He's looking for the officer that he needs to take the head off. And the problem is that he doesn't see the big picture because he's so focused. Whereas the commander out the back, he's not involved with the actual fighting. He can't be, because if he was, he wouldn't be able to command the army properly. So, he's out the back in some tent probably, commanding the whole army, including the sniper. And the general or whatever he is, the officer, he knows the big picture. He knows that actually at the moment that officer is not the most important thing. Something else on the battlefield is more important. The sniper might think, I should just be able to take the shot because it's, I can see how important this officer is and it's clearly the most important thing at the moment. But he doesn't know the whole plan for his own army or the opponent's army. So I don't know if that makes sense. I feel like it's not a terrible analogy. It's one that I actually haven't heard. I came up with that. I'm pretty pleased.
Oh, no, okay. Fair.
So, the sniper doesn't understand the entire battle. He understands his piece of the battle. He understands it very, very well, but it's a very limited understanding.
He probably doesn't
Whereas
know why
the officer
doesn't know why he's fighting even.
Probably. Whereas the officer behind the lines is not directly firing a gun or anything like that, but he understands what needs to happen to win the fight.
Yeah. That's good.
That would be my personal analogy. Otherwise, I'd have to steal something that McGilchrist has said in the past. So,
my goodness, and my fortress, my high tower, and my deliverer, my shield, and he in whom I trust.
Two words McGilchrist likes to peel out, particularly about knowledge and way the two different hemispheres understand knowledge, are the German words kennen and wissen.
Yep.
You want to give your understanding about that?
With my 1 year of German at university,
because
so
there's no translatable words in English.
No, if you put either of them into Google Translate, they'll come back as no, K-N-O-W. And it's very annoying in English that we have only one word for both meanings because they are quite distinct. I think basically every other language, every other language that I'm aware of, has two words for the two different meanings. English, despite the fact that we seem to have stolen a lot of great things from a lot of languages, has fallen behind on that front. So the closest that you get, if anyone speaks French, I believe the words are savoir and connaître. And for Portuguese, you have saber and conhecer. So in German, at least, I'll stick with that because it's more my ballpark. If I say, I know that the sky is blue, I would say, ich weiß. I know this. I know it as a fact. I know it as a discrete point of information. If you wanted to say, I know them as a group of people, you might say, ich kann. So that's the conjugated form of kennen. So if you say ich weiß, you mean I know a fact. I know a point of information. It's discrete. It is a fact. That's all it is. If you say I know a person, you know, you don't know your wife as a fact. Well, I guess you know her as the fact of she exists.
Well, you know my wife, she's got brown hair, she's got brown eyes.
Exactly. You can state facts about her, but she is not herself a fact. She's a living thing that is, as all living things are, in flux or in a state of flow, and they are never static. And that's one of the hemispheres. The left hemisphere likes things static, piecemeal, decontextualized. The right hemisphere sees things flowing, it sees things in motion, it sees things in context and connected to each other, and it sees things in relationship to each other, not as a standalone fact. So there's the two forms of knowing. And the problem is that in English we have to look at the context of something to find out of the sentence or phrase to know what it actually means when we say, I know X, or whatever.
It probably poses the question then, of those two types of knowledge, which one is best for jiu-jitsu?
Well, I think this leads actually kind of into something that McGilchrist goes into at the end of his book, where everything should I say, generally follow a pattern of sort of right, left, right. So neuropsychologically, everything new, everything as it is first present to us, he goes into a bit of detail about, present and represented. The left hemisphere sort of represents things, but it's not the original presentation. So as things are presenced to us, the first time, they are always initially processed in the right hemisphere. That's where everything new first sort of gets done. So the first time you hear a piece of music, it's one of the reasons that the first time you hear a piece of music is usually sort of the most powerful, you might say, depends on what you're listening to or whatever. It's usually more moving or it's more exciting or whatever than the 10th time you hear it, because it's never quite the same second time. The first time something happens, it's processed in the right hemisphere. And whenever you're trying to recall how to do something or that sort of thing, it's usually the left hemisphere. Like when you're first learning how to do something, so if I'm learning how to, I don't know, fold origami, that's going to be in my right hemisphere first. As I'm processing it until I get it down to not a habit, but as I get it down to a routinized, so routine as well. The left hemisphere loves routine.
I hate routine.
As an action gets routinized, it becomes sort of shifted into the left hemisphere. So as you're learning a new skill, it's present in the right hemisphere, and as it becomes more habitual and routinized and automatic, it becomes part of the left hemisphere's field of expertise, you could say. But McGilchrist says it should not stop there. So it should not go right to left. Because once you have something routinized and sort of learnt, you've got to shift it back into the unconscious sort of field of the right hemisphere. So you've got to put it back into the context of things. It's no use if you learn how to, what's the word? Like you learn how to, or what's a good example I should say? If you're doing something at the inappropriate time, it doesn't matter how well you use it. You have to do it in the right context. And so as far as jiu-jitsu is concerned, I would say something like...
well, it's probably the development of style. Like, first of all, we know the technique, then we switch it to the left, gets all sorted out, calculated there. Then when we're processing it back, we're adding our certain flavor, flair.
I'd potentially go even and squash that further and add more to it. So I'd say you show something, you or I or whatever, whoever's teaching shows a technique, and by the end of class, people should be trying to kind of get a feel for what small changes they need to make to our instructions to get it to work for them in a sort of left hemispheric way. And then it has to be returned to the right hemisphere through sort of live drilling, live wrestling, sparring, whether that's positional sparring or just completely free, like open mat sparring, doesn't matter. They have to say, right, in this context, it's like, this is the timing, this is the moment that I want to use something. So, if you teach someone how to do a particular guard pass, let's say a leg drag. Now, a leg drag is not an appropriate guard pass to use every single time you're trying to pass the guard. Sometimes that's going to go really badly for you. Now, the problem is, if you don't understand the context of when to use a leg drag, you're going to get swept, or you might get submitted with it, whatever the case is. So that would be more of something that you have to learn through a bit of trial and error. You've got the movement down. You're a king at leg drags. You've got them down, like muscle memory or whatever is really good. However you've learnt it, you've got it down, and you kind of have maybe a setup. But the setup is dependent on the context. You have to know when to tap into that skill. And that's kind of going from that right to left and then back into the right. You've got to have that understanding of when is it appropriate to use this technique that I have sort of physically, skill-wise, I have it down. Whether I have it tactically is different.
Yeah.
That would be my example.
Yeah, that's good. You've told me that.
Not quite.
And you told me who
no,
they were,
it's...
so I know who you are.
Who? I didn't say
Tyson.
Who. I said I know one person that you're aware of.
There have been a few others. I know who they are.
Well, look. So the way that I like to teach is
How rude. How rude for a student to... I don't care.
I like
I
to
love
teach
you
in a
too,
certain way.
Tyson. You're awesome, man.
I probably go into too much detail, which is my downside, and I overload people.
Yes,
but
you're one step away from Hannah Gracie.
I've never liked listening to him teach, actually, and that's
too much talking.
Possibly because he reminds me of myself. Yeah.
You bragging all about the things you can do every time you make a pitch. If you're so smart, how come you ain't rich?
I guess I like to show every single detail and kind of give a brief explanation, as brief as possible, as to why I like to do things that particular way. And this is the only reason why I like to give the explanation as to why I do things. I find that helps put into context, or it makes it easier to sort of bring back into context. So if I'm explaining something about why I like a particular grip or whatever when I'm taking the back, so there's one that I bang on about a lot where if I have one hook in on the legs, I always look for an underhook on the opposite arm. So if I have a hook on their left hip with my leg, I always want to have my left arm underhooking from the back their left arm. And
see, all I'm hearing now is just blah blah blah.
well, this is the reason that I like to add those kinds of details. When I teach that, I explain if I get those two, it's much harder for people to sort of twist and roll out of a back escape. And I find sometimes, at least, when I teach something and I don't explain why I do something, people kind of maybe not assume that it's not important, but they kind of forget why it's important, I guess. And so they might forget a step, and that throws the whole thing off, because in real time, when you're trying to put it back from learning sort of the skill itself, once you've got the skill down, you might have kind of missed part of the skill that helps put it back into the context. That's the main reason.
Like, personally, that's just way too much. Like,
detail.
I think people learn by finding things out themselves.
Yes.
That's the best way they learn. And if they've always got to be thinking, oh, what did Tyson tell me? There's those steps. Like in competition, oh, lucky Tyson's there telling me what to do. What about in a real situation when you're not around? What are they going to do? Can you hold on? Can you hold on? Before you bash my head in, I've just got to get my leg in the right position and underhook under there.
Yeah, no, that is legitimate criticism. The only thing I would say is that probably takes a bit more time, or not necessarily more time. It takes more focus during rolling. They actually both methods take about the same amount of time, because my problem is that you have more explicit information that you have to turn back into implicit sort of action. So, I mean, I don't think when I'm wrestling, underhook this arm. I don't have time to think about that. It's got to be automatic. I've got to. I can't even see it. Yeah, it's intuitive. It has to become intuitive again. And so the problem is that both methods take about the same amount of time, but one of them I find takes a little bit more focus, which is learning on your own. I think that takes just a little bit more focus when you're wrestling, because you have to watch yourself and be aware of what you're doing and the reactions that it's getting.
I'd just like to highlight a quote I think I've used in the past in class by Richard Feynman, the physicist.
I think I've heard the name. I don't know them.
He said,
well,
when he's talking about teaching his students, he says, "Teach them the principles, not formulas." I think that's a good base understanding for anyone teaching, is that the principle is more important than the formula, because with the principles you have a greater understanding of the broad concepts involved, and you're not just thinking, oh, what's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? You don't see the big picture.
What's the correct part of the formula?
Yeah,
you kind of understand.
I've missed that part. Now I've got to start all again. Teaching methods as well. It comes down a lot to do with the personality of the person.
I enjoy talking.
I enjoy doing rather than talking. All right, so where have we got to? Have we helped anyone with this? How many your left brain and your right brain working together?
Yes. If you lose one hemisphere for whatever reason, life becomes a lot harder, just in different ways. Potentially you might say it would be better to lose your left hemisphere in a few in some ways, but look, it's best to have just both sides of your head intact and both sides operating in the right way.
Well, I feel
it's like someone said to McGilchrist, it sounds like you want everyone to have a left hemisphere stroke, and he said, that's not what I want at all.
Well, just imagine, without the right brain, we just wouldn't love anything. We wouldn't love jiu-jitsu. We wouldn't see the meaning behind it. We wouldn't value how
it would
it's
be a
affected
dull
our
world.
lives.
It would be a two-dimensional world.
Yeah.
It'd be like the difference between a Picasso painting and, I don't know, just something much more vibrant and 3D. Yeah.
All right, well, I think we might just call it quits there.
Yes.
Very good discussion, Tyson. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I don't know if we've answered any questions or just made a whole lot of more questions in people's minds here. But
look, what would life be if it weren't for a few questions? It'd be pretty boring, wouldn't it?
You bragging all about the things you can do every time you make a pitch. If you're so smart, how come you ain't rich? You claim to have picked every horse that won, 'cause you know just which is which. Yes, if you're so smart, tell me how come you ain't rich?